Hello, I'm Susan Blair from Together Yes, and with Progress Norwood, Norwood Community Media, Norwood Library, Friends of Norwood Library. We're pulling together as a community to study some critical faiths. I'm dressed like this because I just met members of our high school's environmental youth coalition out of the community garden. And didn't get time to change. And we talked about climate change, and we had our masks, and we have lived through pandemic together. And I cannot believe that they don't have the same apprehensions I do. I don't know how we're going to handle this because we don't know how to handle it. We've never done this before. We've never done pandemic. Actually, most of us didn't do economic depression. We had ancestors who did. I heard from my grandmothers who saved their bread wrapper and things, but we don't know how to do any of this. And what we really don't know how to do is keep ourselves mentally healthy, because throughout our history, mental health has not been something that we discussed or considered important. You keep yourself physically healthy and then behave. That's all that was required. Now we understand that mental health is considered in order to adapt or cope with anything. So I'm really pleased to have Meg Martineau here, who is truly an expert in the field, and will talk to us some about how we nurture our mental health, how we maintain our mental health. That means that some of us now are going to be able to remember to brush our teeth in the morning when we get up again, because some days we forget during pandemic and isolation. It's a lot is going to get better for us and easier for us. But we can't guarantee that there won't be problems in our lives, and big ones maybe. And so Meg's going to give us some pointers on how we'll cope with that. And now I'd like to let Kate Sibbing-Dunn from Progress Norwood say a few words.
Great, thank you, Susan. I just want to echo some of what Susan said to thank Meg for being here. As some of you know, watching, and some of us in the room here are familiar with the work that Together Yes and Progress Norwood and the library and Norwood Community Media have been doing for a few years now. But what we know is that with the pandemic, it changed everything. It changed how we worked together and how we were able to work on the things that we really cared about. And a lot of those things were things that helped us feel less anxious by working together, by being able to work on the challenges, specifically with the environment and with climate change and some other social justice issues. What helped us get through that is being together and working with other community groups and feeling productive and not just, spinning our wheels. And so the past year and a half or so has been really challenging and isolating, which we know can be really hard. So it's super important to us, and to have this talk tonight. We will thank you, Meg, for coming. And just for the community members to know that Progress Norwood does have teams working on the environment. We have a cultural competency team, and we have a political issues team, and that's to help people participate in civic issues here in Norwood. So we all know that we've all been struggling the last couple of years, and we hope that this talk will give us some helpful tips, but also to make us feel connected, which is what we try to do. So thank you so much, Meg. Really appreciate it.
Hello, everyone, here and virtually. I'm very excited to be here today, give her my mask. And I'm really honored that Susan asked me to be part of this great series that she's been putting on for the town of Norwood. Ironically, Susan is the perfect person to hear this talk, because she will be the first to admit that of her mental health challenges, yet she has made such tremendous impact to the Norwood community through her committed action. I'll get to this in the talk, but our human brains can get us into so much trouble sometimes, and many times we don't recognize the good we're doing on a day-to-day basis. So thank you, Susan and Kate and everyone at Progress Norwood, for giving me the opportunity to speak today, and everything that you have done and continue to do for the community. It's really quite amazing if you step back and look at it. All right, so before I jump into the content of this presentation, I always think it's nice just to give audience members a little snapshot of who I am and my relevant experience on this topic. I grew up close to here, down the street in Medfield, and was very fortunate to have parents that valued education, time outside, and giving back to others. After college, I found myself working with kids with developmental disabilities and was on track to get my Ph.D. in behavior analysis. So I've been really trained through a behavioral science lens to solve socially significant problems. And as my career has rolled along in private and public schools, I've continued to learn more about how the behavioral sciences and mental health services are so deeply intertwined. I've spent years getting called in for behavior problems when at their core, they're really mental health issues. For years, I've worked with teachers, parents, and kids on teaching evidence-based skills that can create improvements in mental health. I've seen a lot of dramatic improvements with clients over the years. I'm not a trained psychologist, but I do know a lot about human behavior, mental health, how our brains work, and how we can shift out of patterns that don't serve us. I'm also really passionate about this topic because I've been through this process myself. My personal breaking point was when I was 9 months pregnant with my second child in March of 2020, when the world just started to shut down in the pandemic. Life was just at a super chaotic pace. I was overloaded. Like many of you, I have big feelings about the future, and I found myself in a state I just didn't want to be in. I was just depressed. I just wasn't happy. I wasn't myself. So I committed to small but consistent steps that I knew from firsthand experience worked. And over time, I've continued to see pretty dramatic shifts unfold. I consider myself extremely lucky, and I know I have a lot of privilege in saying this, that I have many of these solutions right at my fingertips and the capacity to kind of trial them out. So I'm really excited to be here tonight to share those with you. I hope that you find some value in them. So the content of this presentation is based on a behavioral framework to mental health. Radical behaviorism represents B.F. Skinner's work, which laid the foundation for applied behavior analysis, which is the next generation of behaviorism. This field is just exploding. We just have tons of more people getting involved in this work. It's also called ABA. It's a systematic framework for looking at how we can address and solve socially significant behavioral problems. And this has led to relational frame theory, which is a way in which we look at how language and connections within our brain develops. And it really just looks at how language is conditioned through our environment. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, is a common mental health treatment that examines your current thought patterns that you're having, how to identify some of that negative thinking that is going on, and most importantly, how to build a new repertoire of thought patterns that better serve you. Acceptance and commitment therapy, that is really the next generation of mental health through a behavioral lens, and the one that I've really been kind of focusing mostly on tonight. This is where we're really looking at our mental health through acceptance and understanding, accepting that part of the human experience is that negative emotions are going to come up. But what I love about ACT, it adds this piece about values, of identifying what values are important to you, so that you can develop strategies to make sure that you're living in your values every day. I'll get to that later in the talk. But a piece about it that I love about behaviorism is that we're a scientifically focused field, and our strategies come from proven science, and they've consistently demonstrated positive outcomes. All right, so let's get to the good stuff. Before I start walking through some strategies that all of us can integrate, I want to reflect on one question. Do you deserve to be happy? Think about that for a second. If you don't answer like hell yes, you can probably just leave the rest of this presentation, because it's my assertion that we all deserve to be happy. You deserve to be happy. We're all worth it. But at the core of this too is that no one is really responsible for your own happiness except for you. You won't ever be able to attain happiness by blaming someone else for your problems or waiting for someone else to come in and save you. You need to commit to doing the work yourself. This is especially important to understand because improving your mental health isn't a quick fix, right? This isn't going to just change overnight. If you're here or you're listening online, something's troubling you, you've gotten into a pattern that you recognize is not great, but there's a way out. And I've cherry-picked some of the things that I think are the most powerful steps you can take. And we only have an hour tonight. So I really hope that throughout this presentation, you can reflect and take what resonates with you, leave what doesn't, but I hope that you can come away with one or two things that maybe you can do differently starting tomorrow. All right, so what I would like to do tonight is take you on a little journey of strategies that taken together can create greater improvement in your mental health. We'll walk through each one of these steps individually, but as you can see, it's a kind of a loop that feeds itself again and again. It's a process that you keep coming back to, but by integrating these practices regularly in your life, it can be a game changer for your mental health. So let's start with accepting where you are. Might sound simple, but it's a bit big because it requires you to understand the current state of the world, how our brains work, our childhood experiences, and what our current baseline is in terms of how we feel and process emotions. So right now, as Kate and Susan said, our world is humming and moving along. To put it succinctly, there's a lot going on right now. We are just flooded with information all the time. For mental health, the trends are not moving in the direction we hoped. It's not really surprising that we're all looking for ways to improve our mental health given the state of the world. 78% of Americans say this pandemic is a significant source of stress. This is all according to the American Psychological Association. 63% of Americans say the economy is a significant source of stress. And 70% of Gen Z adults ages 18 to 23 experience common symptoms of depression, noting that they feel so tired within the past 2 weeks that they sat around and did nothing. This is really affecting all of us at all age ranges for various reasons. There's a general apprehension about the world. An American Psychological Association survey in February 2020 found that 2/3 of American adults say they felt at least a little eco-anxiety, which is defined as worry or concern about the climate change and its effects. And nearly half of those under age 34 said that the stress about climate change affects their daily lives. The concern and worry about the environment is a growing mental health issue, especially for young people. So taken together, this is just simply too much. We begin to shut down if we're bombarded with negative information. And this is actually a behavioral process. It's called the Ostrich Effect. It's this well-documented idea that people stop attending to information, even though it may be relevant, because the stimuli are consistently too aversive. So think of an ostrich putting their head in the sand to remain safe, or a person avoiding looking at a bill that's coming in the mail that they knew they'd charged something big on their credit card. I certainly know many people who feel this way. They feel hopeless and overwhelmed. They're deeply concerned about the state of the world, but tend to throw their hands up in the air because they don't know what to do. It's better to look away because the problem's simply too big. We're human. This is to be expected. Unfortunately, this is a dangerous position to be in because in the worst case scenario, the behavioral effect is you could have people who are very motivated about the changing the world, but they're not acting on it. I've gone through this process myself. It's understandable to be in this position, but it's my hope that by incorporating some of the things we talk about tonight, you can get out of this state sooner rather than later. We also need to understand a little bit about how our human brains work. We know that the brain is made up of a system of neuron pathways and synapses, and much like muscles in our body, neural pathways get strengthened the more times we think about the same thought. If we think about the brain like a spider web of neurons and synapses, when children are little, the spider web is incredibly messy and it can look disorganized. But as we get older, the brains go through a process called synaptic pruning. As thought patterns and connections in the brain are made, synaptic pruning occurs, and the brain eliminates extra synapses. The spider web, in a sense, just gets more organized. It's really, I just think it's so amazing that we know enough about the biology of the brain that we can see that these thought patterns, and they really do happen early in childhood. So for all of us, if we're doing a reality check on our thought patterns, we need to reflect on our own personal childhood. Our brains go through massive changes in organization through systematic pruning when we were little. So think about what was happening around you when you were little and how people talked to you when you were young. This is critical to understanding your thinking now. Did your parents model lots of positive self-talk, like you have an amazing heart, you brighten up every room you're in? Or were you always met with criticism, negativity? Were you in a home where you had to fight for attention, or you experienced abuse? Our experiences as young children set the stage for how these thought patterns emerge. So let's just think of an example. Say you're a kid and something happened at school that upsets you. You approach your parent to tell them about it, and they say, "Oh, I'm too busy. I don't have time for this." The result is the child obviously doesn't feel too great. They might also start thinking, no one really loves me, I'm not good enough, my concerns have no value, or my emotions aren't important enough to bring up. And they begin to learn to push away these emotions when they pop up. So lots of negative conclusions can be made from some sort of interaction with a parent. And you think about these interactions as they're compounded over time, how that can develop kind of thought patterns within your brain. But let's say you had parents that handled the situation differently. Let's say their reaction was, that sounds hard, tell me more. The shift in language results in a lot of different conclusions for the child. Now their feelings and emotions have value. It's okay to discuss these things. There's an opportunity for problem solving. And the child, most importantly, feels seen and heard. So this is just one interaction. But think about the compounding effect of multiple interactions of this over time and what it can do to your thinking. In addition to our childhood, if that's not a big enough nugget to digest, we also need to understand that human brains, like, man, they really got us. They demonstrate a negativity bias and that we're more likely to attend to negative stimuli. So if you're presented with positive stimuli or negative information, there's plenty of research to support that we come away with whatever the negative information is. And so, I mean, isn't that the truth, right? You can have a great day at work, but you end up coming back thinking about the one or two things that didn't go so great. So it can, if you think about it, it can really be easy to fall into a pattern of negative thinking since we're hardwired that way. And one of the challenging things about the current state of the world is the abundance of negative information coming at us all the time. And the reality is, you're paying attention, especially to the news, there's a constant stream of negative information coming at you. If you think about it, the news itself is constantly scanning the world for bad news. We're really volunteering our mental energy to watching information that we know is going to be negative. So a super simple takeaway is to examine what are all the negative stimuli that you're allowing into your experience on a day-to-day basis, and how does that make you feel after experiencing that? Maybe it's time to just hit the pause button, skip the news for a week, or stop answering the phone when that negative friend that complains about everything all the time and you can never seem to turn their mood around. Just switch it up, like see how that feels. Our brains are also incredibly active. It's been demonstrated that humans think over 6,000 thoughts per day. Many of them are repetitive. So left unattended, our brain can be a runaway train of negative thoughts and feelings. You get caught into these loops without even realizing. And then you create these stories in your head that get chemically rewarded. And I think this is part of the reason why meditation is such a powerful tool, because it forces you to quiet your mind and press the pause button on all your thoughts. Your brain is really like any other organ in your body. Your brain thinks, your heart beats, and understanding that your brain is an organ and not your identity is where you can start to find some power over control of your mental health. So I'm sure many of us have found us in these cycling thoughts. So how do we get out of this repetitive habits that don't really serve us? Let's use what we know to our advantage. We can't stop the waves from coming, but we can learn to surf. With some dedicated work and steps, we can get our brains to work in our favor. We're stuck in these bodies, it's got its pluses and minuses, and we all know we're going to be exposed to negative information. So let's learn how to surf through it so we can experience it, but still accomplish the goals that we set for ourselves in life. So this is Stephen Hayes. He is the originator of acceptance and commitment therapy, and he refers to this negative thinking pattern as the dictator within. And he recommends that the first step is acknowledging it. And even there's a lot of resources about how to do this, but one of the simple ones is just give that negativity monster in your brain a name. Mine is Cheryl, and when she pops up, I just tell her to shut up every now and then. But giving that creates some space, so it doesn't feel like that is controlling your whole experience. And the thing about that negativity monster is they just keep creeping in when you least expect it. So understanding where you are takes work, but we can't make progress without examining where we're starting from. So think about your own experience. What are the repetitive thoughts that don't serve you, that you are constantly engaging in? What about your childhood is feeding into those thought patterns? And what stories have you created and made up about yourself that might be inaccurate? And these are some really big questions. Typically, diving into this stuff requires the help of a mental health professional, and because sometimes our thinking is so strong, especially if you've been in these patterns for years, it can really blind you, and you need the help of an impartial person to dig through where you're at. Can they hear? Okay. So part of acceptance is knowing that negative emotions are gonna come up. We're wired that way. It's all part of the human experience. So when these negative experiences pop up, it's an opportunity to explore where healing occurs. Stephen Hayes refers to it as working through the wisdom of your pain. We all have certain pressure points that we need to work through, which can be really hard because they're so ingrained in our experience. So for example, like I came out of childhood with my default emotion was guilt for like a lot of reasons, some of which I'm Irish Catholic, but it's my default emotion that I just kind of hold on as baggage throughout life. And I know I over-apply it. I'm aware of it. I try and work through it. It's gotten better, but it keeps popping back up when I least expect it. And that's when therapy can really be valuable because you need an impartial person helping you work through some of these hardwired thoughts. All right, accepting where you are leads directly to feeling your emotions. This may sound easy, but I think it's a harder one, especially if you're not used to it. If you kind of swallowed your emotions when you were growing up. This is a foreign concept of me. I grew up in a very waspy family. We were just passive aggressive to each other. We were upset with each other. But for feeling emotions, if you're feeling an emotion, don't push it away for no one to see or feel. When you do this, it actually creates, it's a great way to ensure that the feeling lingers in your body day after day. Instead, when you feel an emotion that doesn't feel so great, I encourage you to get curious about it. What does it feel like? Is it heavy, light, a butterfly feeling, a tightness, a pinching of your shoulders? Where is it in the body? How long does it last? And the most important question is there anything I can do now to create shift away from those physical sensations? When we have the courage to actually look at our emotions, face them head on, and attempt to process them, a funny thing happens. The emotions have a tendency to dissipate faster. They're a funny thing, they want to be seen. If you don't believe me, I just encourage you to give it a shot. So let's walk through a pretty classic example. So say you wake up one morning and you're missing a loved one who passed on. We've all been there. It's a particular time of year. You just thought about them for some reason. You start to miss them and you start feeling down. In this situation, label it. Bring the emotion to the surface. Don't let it hide. Say it aloud. I'm feeling sad today because I miss so-and-so. And it feels like a heaviness in my shoulders, a weight in my stomach, and like tears are going to burst out of me at any moment. We've all been there where we're pushing back the tears because you're at work or it's not an appropriate time, but then you get home and you have the opportunity to release it. You have a good cry session in the privacy of your own home. And after you regroup, that release caused, the release caused by crying changes your mood. But maybe for you, it's not crying. Maybe for you, it's taking a long walk or talking to a good friend, exercising, a nap, writing in your journal, or even just watching trashy TV. The point is that being human means we experience emotions, and the sooner we acknowledge those sensations in our body, the sooner we can find a way to help move them along. And rather than holding on to them and feeling them on a day-to-day basis because we don't address them, they can dissipate faster. And also, if you have strategies like watching trashy TV, I feel like people feel guilty about this stuff all the time, but it actually does, if it shifts your mood, there's nothing to feel guilty about in that regard. So this is a bit of a dance because we just agreed it's important to acknowledge our emotions, but it's also critical to acknowledge that you are not your emotions. They're simply physical sensations going on in your body. So create some space between you and your emotions. Adjust your language. Say, I'm feeling angry instead of I am angry. This adjustment in creating distance between yourself and your identity and your feelings actually gives you a bit of power back. Also acknowledge that it's eventually going to pass and that you don't need to be stuck in this particular emotion forever. On the flip side, make sure you're doing the same thing for positive emotions like happiness, joy, peace, luck, and gratitude. When they pop up, allow yourself to really feel them, enjoy them, soak them in, hold on to them a little bit longer. Feeling good can guide us to sources of joy and fulfillment. And then take stock. What helped those positive feelings pop up? What other things make you happy? Give yourself permission to experience it regularly. If it makes you happy to see friends, listen to music, go for a walk, doing library events, then go do it. Be kind to yourself and see if there's ways that you can incorporate these things throughout the day. If you want to be happier, do more of what makes you happy. I think a common feeling that pops up, I know certainly with me that I've had to work through, is that how could I possibly be happy when there's so much trouble and pain in the world? The ironic part is if we all focused on our own happiness instead of what everyone else is doing, the world would be a much happier place. If we're lucky enough to be in a state where we're truly authentically happy, your joy will spread to others simply by spending time with you. Happiness is contagious, so let yourself experience it when it pops up. All right, moving right along to identifying your triggers. What is a trigger? A trigger can be any stimulus outside of the body that initiates a thought pattern or negative emotion. So if you closed your eyes for a second, you thought about all the things that can happen outside of your body, like any of that could be a possible trigger, and they're individualized. So it could be a person, a place, a thing, sounds, smell, time of day, really anything. We've all got them, but being aware of what your triggers are can give you back some power over your emotions. I love this slide. It says, between the stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and freedom. I really like this because this speaks to the power of when you identify your triggers, it creates a space for you to consciously decide how you are going to react instead of having a knee-jerk reaction to whatever is happening around you. All right, so here's an example, a personal example. So I had probably relevant for a lot of people. I had a coworker that drove me cuckoo. She drove me nuts. She always made things harder than they needed to be. I just found her very challenging to work with, and I couldn't avoid her. I needed to work with her on a lot of things. And I started to observe my patterns, and I realized that I could handle her in the morning when I was like juiced up, ready for the day. But by the time 2 o'clock hit, if I had to deal with her, I just couldn't handle it. I would get very triggered. My mind would immediately jump to all these like negative thoughts about her. I'd create stories about her in my mind. There were a few instances where I was like crying at work. I was like so frustrated. It was just like not good. It was something needed to change. So in situations like this, you can either leave the situation, change the situation, or accept it. This quote is from Eckhart Tolle, who's done a lot of work in terms of mindfulness and being present. And I find myself coming back to this quote again and again when these negative emotions pop up of like, how should I handle this situation? So in this previous example, a lot of peace came to me through acceptance. Like I knew I couldn't leave. I needed to work with this person. Like I need a paycheck. And instead of continuing to replay an inaccurate story in my head about her, I accepted that she was actually doing her best, which was like a hard pill to swallow. So I couldn't leave, but I could try and change it. So I did something simple. I scheduled all my meetings with her before 1 o'clock, and I stopped replying to all of her extraneous emails because it was out of control. And it actually made a difference. Like I found myself being able to go home in a good mood and not have to process all these negative feelings that I was having about her throughout the day or feeling guilty with how I reacted. So it's really these minor things of just knowing what your triggers are and seeing if you can make some changes that can really give you some power in your day-to-day. When we think about triggers, I encourage you to think about who you're spending your time with. You're the average of the 5 people you spend time with. Be honest, like who are you spending your time with? Are you getting anything out of that relationship? Like, do they make you feel happy? Do you laugh together? Do you push each other to be better? Or are you like many of us where you have relationships simply out of habit? And when you sit back and really think about it, you're putting way more into that relationship than what you're getting out of it. And I'm not asking you to change all of these relationships overnight, but take stock of who you spend time with because they reinforce your behavior and your thinking. And so make sure that you're prioritizing yourself and spending time with people who are encouraging and supporting the best version of you. Okay, committing to your values. This is the good stuff. This is what I love about acceptance and commitment therapy. So this may sound dreamy, but I do believe in this, that people are capable at any time in their lives of doing what they dream of. And when we start talking about our values, we get into some really important questions. Like, what do you want the rest of your life to look like? How do you want to spend your years? What do you want your legacy to be? We all have the power to live the life we want and the life that we can be proud of. So in order to commit to your values, you first have to figure out what your values are. When I say values, it's the certain tenets that are ingrained with who you are. It's like what lights you up, what makes you tick. And so how did I find my values? I actually think Brené Brown, who's a popular psychologist, she has the best list. If you know her, she's done a lot of work with vulnerability, self-improvement. And this is a list of values from her book, Dare to Lead. And she recommends going through this list and marking the ones that pop out at you and whittle it down to 2. I zoomed in here so that you can see it a little bit more easily, but walk through it. Like, what ones pop up for you? Is it gratitude, growth, making a difference, service, joy, fun? The best part is that you can pick what is personally relevant for you. It's different strokes for different folks, right, people? So like, what rings your bells? What gets you going about life? What do you really care about? At first, my values were making a difference and having fun. But now that I've had a little bit of time to experience this, I found that as I revisit the list, it changes a little bit. And that like kind of makes sense because we're evolving creatures, you know? So it's a very good practice to go through this and really trying to nail down what your values are. Once you find your values, commit to them. Check yourself throughout the day about whether you're in your values or not. Tell others you care about that this is a new approach of how you're trying to approach the world through the lens of what's most important to you. And this really is as simple as like just checking yourself periodically throughout the day. Like when you're feeling down or not great, am I in my values? I'm feeling good, am I in my values right now? Driving to work, sitting on the couch, making dinner, am I in my values right now? We have the power to commit to our values, and this is really how we create an incredible legacy for ourselves. Philosophy is not best expressed in words, it's expressed in the choices one makes. This couldn't be closer to the truth. If we really want to change the world and make it a more positive place to be, change your behavior, not just your words. Once you start living in your values, you start to create huge ripple effects around you, some of which you might not be able to see. This is especially true in a day and age when everyone has something to say, that the world is really changed by your example, not your opinion. And there's so much research to support this, that humans are more likely to engage in behaviors when they're modeled by others around them. So much more so than just telling someone to do something. There's this great study out of California that looked at sustainable behaviors, and they found that when people observed others engaging in a water conservation strategy, they were trying to reduce the amount of water that they were using on campus, that the observers were more likely to imitate the behaviors that they saw the other people engage in. So if we want to find ways to change the world and live in our values, is changing your behavior, you can create so much change. All right, last, enjoy your success. Just ride it out to the sunset. In behavioral terms, we call this the power of positive reinforcement. This is really our bread and butter. Behavior goes where reinforcement flows. When you do something of value, celebrate it. Tell your tribe, soak it in, be proud of yourself, and show yourself some love. Celebrating your success is a critical step in helping us rewire our brain with more positive thinking and makes us more likely to live a life tied to our values. Spend some time focusing on all the things you've done well and have accomplished. Take a moment to reflect on what you've done to make yourself proud. Write out a victory board. Write out a list of accomplishments for your day. You know, it feels funny to do it the first couple of times, but if you write it out enough times, it starts to become a habit and it starts to become your thinking. Earlier, we talked about how our brains can create these cycles of negative thoughts. So we can flip that to our advantage and build positive thoughts and stories that can then get recycled in our brain. And this can be done by selecting a few sayings that resonate with your values. So here are a few positive affirmations or self-talk. Some people may have heard of them as mantras. These are just some of my favorites. There's plenty of people online doing this type of work if you want different ideas, but it really can be anything you want it to be. And once you pick one or a few, you need to set yourself up to be successful and put a little effort in before your brain starts to make this a habit. One way to do this is to identify a prompt or thing you regularly encounter to kind of initiate that positive self-talk you'll have to yourself. So I'm a working mom in the times of the pandemic, and I find myself cleaning and doing dishes like all the time. So I started to use the prompt initially of like anytime my hands would touch water, because I was always at the sink doing the dishes, where I would say to myself, okay, what I do every day matters. I'm making the world a better place through my actions. And I found myself, like, rather than getting stuck and being frustrated and kind of just getting, my poor husband, like getting mad at him for not doing the dishes, I found myself shifting from those interactions and being done with cleaning and being able to be in a much more positive state. The piece about this is I just want to make sure that this isn't toxic positivity where we're just saying everything's fine, it's great, no big deal. Like we talked a lot about how we need to understand where we are, that feelings are going to pop up, we're going to address them, but knowing that and despite that, we're going to choose to live in our values and live a life that we want to live. So I view those very differently. All right, we've completed our journey through the cycle. Well done. No one fell asleep, at least I could see. Some key takeaways: be patient and kind with yourself. Tonight we learned about the dictator within that just creeps back into your thinking when you least expect it. Humans, we also love comfort. We don't like change. It takes time for our behavior to change. It's a process. So that's even, why it's so important that small steps are celebrated. And like I said at the beginning of the talk, it's really small steps that you slowly integrate where you can end up seeing bigger changes in the long run. So I hope you can think about one thing you can do differently based off of what you learned tonight. But when those happy moments and feeling arise, please hold on to them a little bit longer. Allow yourself to start feeling good now and give yourself the opportunity to do things that make you happy. I'm going to remind us where we all started, which is, do you deserve to be happy? Remember, it all comes down to this. When you're having a tough moment, a tough day, or a tough week, we all deserve to be happy. You deserve to be happy. Take the first few steps, accept your feelings, face them, find a way to let them move through your body, and remind yourselves of your values and commit to small actions every day. And remember, it's never too late. We're all starting from the same present moment. The beginning is always today. Thank you for your time. It's been such an honor, and I hope it was of value. We're going to do some Q&A.
Yeah.
Should I stay up here?
Yes.
Okay.
Start in the room if there are any. I'm just going to repeat questions. You have microphone.
Yes, Susan.
Of course, I've got a question. When we're talking near the end about setting our values, recognizing our values, rewarding ourselves for sticking with our values, for achieving what we set out to do, can you give us a few words about how to adapt and cope with it when we have to admit we just failed at that? We just failed at that undertaking or upholding a value. We betrayed our value in some action or something.
Yes.
Now what do we do?
You can repeat it, I think, if you want.
Okay, yeah, I could. So virtual audience member Susan was asking, arguing about the answers of the question was in the context of values, how can we do that after we've had a moment where we felt unsuccessful?
Yes.
Yeah.
Where we tried something, where we set out to do something and we failed. And it was something of value
Yeah.
and it was a choice we made
Yeah.
and then we failed at it.
Yeah.
Whether sometimes by our own
Yeah.
doing, sometimes other things interfered, but
Yeah.
somehow we failed. So, okay, how do we
Well,
jump that hump and get back on track?
I would reel it back to reflecting on like how you took the courage to try and do something to make the world better, right? And like one of the values, one of the most common one that people have is courage. And some people say that, I think it was Maya Angelou, that courage is the most important value because you can't really do anything without that. And so knowing that you're going to take a step and possibly be beaten up, like that's part of the process, right? Like we're gonna try things, see if they work. It might fail, we might get beaten up, but if we fail, I have the courage again to stand up and try another time. You know what I mean? And you know, not everything's gonna be a success, right? You know, and I think it's coming to that. You know, I try to. For me, mine are making a difference and now growth. And it's like whatever I can do to make the world a better place. If I know in my heart I approached it in that way, then I can rest easy at night. You know. Any other questions from my friends in the room? Yes,
I
Catherine.
have a question. So you said that you named your negativity monster.
Yes.
How did you come up with it? Because I was trying to think about it.
Catherine's question was coming up with a name for the negativity monster.
Yeah, I like that idea. I just like.
Yeah, I don't.
Okay.
I mean, come up with a name that irritates you, right? Yeah, I don't know why Cheryl popped up. I don't have any Cheryls in my life that I don't like, but it's one of those ones that I just keep it at bay,
Yes,
Cheryl, right? Yeah, exactly, right, yeah.
So I had a question come in from the chat here, which was, how can this approach to self-care be applied as we read and hear the news and feel helpless, for example, with climate change, politics, hatred, besides limiting our intake?
Can you say that one more time? Do I need to
Yes.
repeat that?
I don't think so. I mean, it's in the chat,
Okay,
so
okay.
everybody can see it. So it's how can this approach to self-care be applied as we read and hear the news and feel helpless, other than just limiting our intake of the news?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about thinking about how do you want to live your day-to-day life? Like, what do you want that to be like? And I'm thinking of a study from the American Psychological Association that they're doing much more work around mental health related to the climate crisis. And there's actually a lot of different pieces of that because we talked about climate anxiety, but there are a lot of people, that's kind of a white privilege thing to even say, because a lot of people experiencing climate change consequences are happening now. Like if you live in a lower income community, you're more likely to have asthma, there's wildfires going on, people are actually contacting the consequences of climate change and having to deal with PTSD and all those things. But anyway, one study basically found that I think if you go through this process and work through some of this pain and commit to some values, there was a study that showed individuals who worked on community projects and actually worked on tangible things on how to improve and whatever that may be for whatever you're interested in. But if you're actually working with a group of people and coming together and working on a solution, that your mental health greatly improves, because it gives back some of that autonomy and control over what's going on, and you are in fact making a difference. Yeah, I hope that this isn't just I don't want the message to be from this, just shut off the news and don't pay attention. It's more accepting that or understanding that there are all these things going on, but even despite that and despite those negative feelings going on, I'm going to commit to trying to make the world a better place. One day at a time, Marie Claire, yes. It doesn't hurt to have faith.
I just had a thought to that same end of, if you're in a negative train, thought train, and if you can't a good way to get out of that, in line with what you're just saying, that sometimes it's just to do something for someone else. Not necessarily that you're obligated to do something for, but to take your brain's focus and then to do something good. Is a sort of is a way that I've found that helps you get out of like everything's terrible, in the moment.
Yeah.
Is that, you have,
Oh, yeah, oh, definitely, yeah, if you wanna get out of your own head, go help someone else, do something for someone else, and that it really
like a good
amazes me.
feeling?
Exactly,
Yeah.
yes, exactly, yeah. Yes,
Maybe you would like to give us a few more words on the value of cohesive communities
mhm.
and
Uh,
how this plays in. I know you
Yeah.
you touched on that. but
Mhm.
maybe a little more.
yeah, so Susan was asking to touch on cohesive communities.
Yeah,
And
cohesive and diverse communities that act in concert with one another. This is a
Yes.
community.
yeah, I mean, I guess I already stated this, but it's no one's alone in this, right? Like, so I think a lot of people can feel helpless and alone. And unfortunately, maybe our society is set up in such a way people are feeling so isolated in their silos. But that the act of community and being with people who bring you up and people who are moving the dial forward is going to help your mental health. And a lot of what we do for New England Behavior Analysts for Sustainability is looking at what are community-based solutions that you can actually have an impact. And that's really what a lot of the research shows, is that looking at it at a community level, not trying to think of like, well, like, how am I going to fix this huge problem? It's like, how can I fix what's not going right in my community that I can change? And that's really how you actually create change, is in those individual pockets.
And you have, do you want to give the website or Facebook name or
Yeah.
something for your group, should anybody wish to?
Yeah, and
Join
the
in.
company, Brian Yardo is here too, who's also a Norwood resident. Both environmental leaders for New England Behavior Analysts for Sustainability. And I think the website is just New England Behavior Analysts.
Sustainability New England dot
I'm so-
org.
We need someone with marketing.
Yes.
Sustainability, sustainabilitynewengland.org. If you just Google New England Behavior Analysts for Sustainability, we pop up, but we're on Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram, and we're trying to do this work, which I think is incredibly valuable, is using the behavioral science and lens and applying it to climate change solutions. But this really came about because this is a huge need, right? Like, we can't address climate change if we're not addressing our mental health and committing to taking care of ourselves in the process. And it seems like more and more that this is just part of the conversation, that we need to take care of ourselves in order to kind of address this issue. And I love the behavioral sciences because they have the answer for everything. We just need to get better about disseminating it. So that's what I was hoping to do tonight. I was so happy that Susan asked me to be a part of this, because it's definitely, not a lot of us in our field are doing this type of thing, so. Value.
And it's not what you get when you go to a therapist usually.
No, yeah. It's a little different way of looking at things.
There was one more question that came in. It's kind of a big question, I guess. What's the best way to manage work-related stress? The question that came in.
That is a big question. I mean, if I was looking at that lens, I would, okay, what is the biggest stressor at work? What is the biggest trigger that I have at work, and start there. And see, is there a way to mitigate that? Is there help that I can recruit for that? I mean, you need to get into the nitty-gritty of what that stress is, but certainly incorporating habits of self-care or activities that make you feel good throughout the day is huge. whether it's like, listening to certain positive self-talk affirmations on your way to work, or music that makes you feel good, or making sure you have periods of time during the day in order to take a breath and catch your breath, or finding your crew. I think even sometimes the people you surround yourself with at work, like, can you change that in any way to make that work in your favor? But I mean, they're stressful jobs. Like, I work in public schools. Like, this is a huge issue for teachers. All teachers right now are having a very challenging time because they have a lot of weight on their shoulders, and that healthcare professionals as well. I mean, I'm not denying the fact that these can be challenging situations, but I think it would just be like incorporating what are things on day to day that I can alleviate to make myself feel just a little bit better, and start there. It's with small steps, and then once you make that a habit, then add something more to it. Is usually the best way to go about it. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.